45 states in the United States are currently in moderate or worse drought. That number is not from a fringe weather blog. It is from the U.S. Drought Monitor, updated April 14, 2026. 61% of the entire lower 48 is classified as drought-affected, up from 56% just weeks earlier, and expanding every week. NOAA's Climate Prediction Center has 36 states leaning toward above-normal temperatures this summer. In the last week of March, a heat dome parked over the southwest and expanded into the plains, producing the most expansive March heat wave in American history, shattering more than 7,000 daily temperature records and roughly 2,000 monthly records in a single event. Yuma, Arizona hit 109 degrees Fahrenheit, a new national March record, breaking a mark that had stood since 1954 and 1902. And the National Interagency Fire Center's seasonal outlook from May first projected that by July and August, heat waves, drier than normal weather, and lingering impacts from the current drought will bring an expansive area of above-normal significant fire potential, stretching from the Texas Hill Country to South Florida. The Southeast, from Georgia through the Carolinas, has been in record dry territory dating back to September 2025. And that drought is sitting on top of fuels from Hurricane Helene that are still not cleared. Heavy dead fuels have been consuming entirely in recent fires, and there are widespread reports of fires re-emerging a month or two after being controlled. And none of that is the economics. None of that is the debt ceiling. None of that is the tariffs. None of that is the inflation cascade from the Iran war that is still working its way through the food supply chain. The drought and the heat are an additional layer of catastrophe sitting on top of every other economic pressure that is converging on July and August. And the combination of those layers, the extreme weather, the fiscal deadline, the trade policy threat, the energy crisis, and the consumer exhaustion is what makes July and August 2026 potentially the most devastating two-month period for the American economy and the American household since the spring of 2020. Carbon Brief projects 2026 as the second warmest year in recorded history. Global sea surface temperatures hit a new daily record in mid-April 2026. March 2026 was the second warmest March on record globally. El Niño is expected to strengthen through the summer, which suppresses hurricane activity but amplifies heat, drought, and wildfire risk across the continental United States. NOAA's outlook means that the heat wave season will begin earlier, last longer, and affect more of the country than in any recent year. And every degree of additional heat is a degree of additional electricity demand, a degree of additional water stress on crops, a degree of additional wildfire risk, a degree of additional physical danger to the 60 million Americans over age 65 who are most vulnerable to heat-related illness and death. The CDC has documented that heat kills more Americans per year than any other weather event. And the heat kills disproportionately in communities without reliable air conditioning, without insulated housing, without access to cooling centers, and without the financial resources to absorb a 40% spike in their electric bill during a July heat wave. July and August are coming, whether America is ready or not, and the window to prepare for what those 2 months will deliver is closing by the day. The actions you take in May and June will determine whether you absorb the July and August compression from a position of relative strength or a position of maximum vulnerability. There is no neutral position. You are either ahead of it or underneath it. And underneath it in July and August of 2026 means a heat wave you cannot afford to cool, a grocery bill you cannot afford to pay, an electric bill that consumes what was left of your margin, and a debt ceiling standoff that crashes the retirement account you were counting on to fund the next 20 years of your life. Drought across 45 states is about to collide with a food supply chain that is already broken by war. When 61% of the country is in drought during the growing season, the crop forecasts that determine fall harvest yields, commodity prices, and ultimately grocery store costs are rewritten from the ground up. Corn pollination, which is the single most critical period in the American grain calendar, because corn is the feedstock for livestock, for ethanol, for sweeteners, for processed food, and for export contracts that determine global food prices, happens in July. If July delivers the above-normal heat that NOAA's Climate Prediction Center has projected for 36 states, combined with the drought that is already at 61% coverage, the Corn Belt from Iowa through Illinois, through Indiana, through Ohio, will face a pollination period under extreme thermal stress. Corn pollen viability drops sharply when daytime temperatures exceed 95 degrees for consecutive days. The 2012 drought, which was the last comparable event, caused corn yields to fall 27% and pushed corn prices to record highs that cascaded through every food category in the American grocery store. A similar yield loss in 2026 would arrive on top of food prices that are already 36% higher than 2014 levels, on top of an energy cost increase from the Iran war that has not yet fully passed through to food, and on top of a fertilizer price environment that has been volatile since the Ukraine war disrupted global nitrogen and potash supply chains. Soybeans, which pollinate in late July and August, face the same risk window. Winter wheat, which is harvested in June and July across Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, is already stressed by the persistent drought that has covered the southern plains since late 25. The USDA will release its critical July crop production estimates in mid-July, and if those estimates show yield declines consistent with the drought conditions, the commodity markets will reprice immediately. Corn futures, soybean futures, and wheat futures will spike, and the companies that make cereal, bread, cooking oil, animal feed, and the thousands of processed food products that contain corn-derived ingredients will begin adjusting their retail prices within 30 to 60 days of the July report, which means the drought damage that happens in July shows up at your grocery store in September and October, right as the midterm election campaign enters its final weeks. And there is no policy lever that any administration can pull to make it rain. No executive order fixes a drought. No legislation reverses a heat wave. The food supply chain that was already fragile from bird flu, labor deportations, diesel cost increases, and the consolidation of processing capacity into a handful of companies is about to face its most severe weather stress test in over a decade. And the American consumer who is already skipping meals, financing groceries on buy now, pay later plans, and drawing down savings to cover food costs will absorb the impact directly. And the livestock sector is facing its own July and August crisis that compounds the crop damage. The American cattle herd was already at its smallest in 75 years before the drought expanded. Heat stress reduces weight gain in cattle, reduces milk production in dairy cows, and increases mortality in feedlots where animals are packed into confined spaces with limited shade and limited water. During the 2012 drought, cattle liquidation accelerated as ranchers sold animals they could no longer afford to feed or water, which temporarily depressed beef prices but created a supply shortage that took years to rebuild and permanently raised the baseline cost of beef. A repeat of that dynamic in 2026, on top of beef prices that are already 15% higher year over year, would push the cost of a pound of ground beef past $7 in most retail markets. And the water stress extends beyond agriculture. Municipal water systems across the southern plains, the southwest, and parts of the southeast are already implementing conservation measures. Lake Mead and Lake Powell, the two largest reservoirs in the United States, have been declining for over 2 decades. The Colorado River Basin, which supplies water to 40 million people across 7 states, has been in a structural deficit for years, where more water is allocated than the river produces. A severe July and August heat wave and drought would accelerate the depletion of surface water and groundwater reserves that are already being consumed faster than they are being replenished. Water is not just an agricultural input. It is a cooling input for power plants, a processing input for manufacturing, and a survival input for human beings. When water becomes scarce, every system that depends on it degrades simultaneously. Electricity demand will hit record peaks while power plants are retiring faster than they are being replaced. July and August are the peak months for American electricity consumption because air conditioning load drives residential and commercial demand to its annual maximum. In a normal summer, the grid operates near its limits during heat waves and regional stress events create localized risks of brownouts and rolling blackouts. Summer 2026 is not a normal summer. NOAA has projected above normal temperatures across 36 states. The drought is drying out hydroelectric reservoirs across the West, reducing the available generation capacity from dams that normally contribute significant baseline power during peak season. Natural gas prices are elevated because of the Iran war's disruption to global LNG supply, and natural gas fuels approximately 43% of American electricity generation. Every dollar increase in natural gas prices flows directly into the cost of electricity for every household and business that draws power from the grid. And the data center build-out that Stanford Brookings and multiple analysts have identified as the primary driver of economic growth is simultaneously the largest new source of electricity demand. AI data centers consume massive quantities of power, and the construction boom in Northern Virginia, Texas, Arizona, and the Midwest is pulling grid capacity away from residential consumers and toward corporate consumers who are willing to pay premium rates for guaranteed supply. The result is a grid that has less margin than at any time in the past 2 decades, entering the hottest summer in NOAA's seasonal forecast. ERCOT, the Texas grid operator that came within 4 minutes and 37 seconds of total collapse during the February 2021 winter storm, will face its annual summer stress test with higher demand, higher natural gas costs, and reduced reserve margins. PJM, the grid operator that serves 65 million people across 13 states from the Mid-Atlantic to the Midwest, has warned repeatedly about declining reserve margins as coal and nuclear plants retire faster than renewable and gas capacity can replace them. NOAA, the California grid operator, has issued flex alerts during heat waves in 4 of the past 5 summers. Stanford documented that electricity prices have been running well ahead of overall inflation, and residential electricity costs have increased faster than earnings across much of the country. The average American household paid approximately $40 more per month in December 2025 than in December 2017 for electricity alone. And that increase happened before the Iran war raised natural gas prices and before the summer heatwave season began. By July and August, the combination of war-driven energy costs, drought-reduced hydroelectric capacity, data center-driven demand growth, and extreme heat-driven residential demand will push electricity bills to levels that many households simply cannot absorb on top of the food increases. The healthcare cost increases, the insurance increases, and the transportation cost increases that have already consumed their budgets. August brings America's borrowing limit and a political fight that could crash every market on Earth. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent indicated that the United States will reach its borrowing limit by August 2026. Once the ceiling is hit, the Treasury uses extraordinary measures to continue funding government operations for a limited period, typically several weeks to a few months. But the political dynamics around the 2026 debt ceiling are more volatile than any previous standoff because of the unique convergence of factors that will be operating in August. The midterm election campaign will be in full swing. Every member of the House is running for re-election. Neither party has an incentive to compromise because each sees the ceiling as leverage for their priorities. Republicans will demand spending cuts, Democrats will demand revenue increases, and the margin for a deal is essentially zero in a narrowly divided Congress where a handful of members in either party can block any agreement. And the timing of the August debt ceiling intersects with the tariff reimposition that Bessent suggested could happen as early as July. If tariffs are reimposed in July and the debt ceiling is reached in August, the bond market will face 2 simultaneous shocks: the inflationary impact of new tariffs, which pushes yields higher because inflation erodes the value of fixed-income securities, and the credit risk of a potential government default, which also pushes yields higher because investors demand a premium for lending to a government that might not pay them back on time. The compounding effect of those 2 shocks on Treasury yields would cascade through every interest rate in the American economy: mortgage rates, credit card rates, auto loan rates, student loan rates, business loan rates. All of them are benchmarked to Treasury yields. All of them would rise. And they would rise during a month when consumer sentiment is already at a record low, when credit card delinquencies are at a decade high, when auto repossessions are at their highest since the financial crisis, and when 29% of American adults have already dipped into savings in the past 3 months. A debt ceiling breach, even a brief one, would wipe out retirement account values in a matter of days. The 2011 debt ceiling standoff, which resulted in the first-ever S&P downgrade but no actual breach, erased $2.4 trillion in household wealth in a single week. A 2026 breach, against the backdrop of a country already downgraded by all 3 rating agencies, they're reabsorbing the inflationary shock of a Middle East war, already under pressure from tariffs, drought, and a depleted consumer, would be exponentially worse because the financial system has less resilience to absorb the shock and the consumer has less savings to weather the storm. And the political incentives around the August ceiling are uniquely toxic. In previous standoffs, the party controlling the White House typically wanted a clean debt ceiling increase, while the opposition demanded concessions. In 2026, the dynamics are inverted by the midterm calendar. Every Republican incumbent running in a swing district needs to demonstrate fiscal conservatism to their base. Every Democrat running in a competitive race needs to attack the deficit increase created by the OBBA. Neither party benefits politically from a quiet resolution. Both benefit from a dramatic standoff that allows them to posture for their voters. And the standoff itself, even if it ends before a breach, creates market damage. The 2023 near miss contributed to the Fitch downgrade. The 2011 near miss triggered the S&P downgrade and the $2.4 trillion wealth wipe. Each successive standoff degrades institutional trust. And institutional trust, once lost, does not recover on a timeline that helps the 66-year-old whose retirement account just lost 15% of its value in a week of political theater. The retirement account does not know the standoff was resolved. It only knows it lost $45,000 in 5 trading days. And the compound growth that would have been generated by that $45,000 over the next 20 years of retirement is gone permanently. The political standoff lasted a week. The financial damage lasts a lifetime. Student loan borrowers face a complete overhaul of repayment rules that nobody has explained to them. Brookings documented that the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, signed into law in July 2025, significantly limits how much graduate and professional students can borrow and overhauls the student loan repayment system for both new and existing borrowers. The implementation of these changes is being managed by a Department of Education, whose staff has reportedly been cut by nearly half. The law eliminates the SAVE repayment plan that 8 million borrowers were enrolled in or had applied for, and replaces it with a system that increases monthly payments for many borrowers while reducing the maximum borrowing limits for graduate students. Borrowers who were on income-driven repayment plans that cap their payments at 5 to 10% of discretionary income may see their required payments increase significantly under the new structure. And the transition between the old system and the new system is happening during a period when the Department of Education's administrative capacity has been gutted by staff reductions and organizational restructuring. Brookings specifically warned that effectively managing the student loan program through the transition will be a challenge. And the word challenge in that context is a euphemism for administrative chaos that will affect 43 million Americans who hold federal student loan debt, totaling approximately $1.6 trillion. And the student loan changes intersect with every other July and August pressure point, because the borrowers who are affected are the same consumers who are paying higher food prices, higher energy costs, higher insurance premiums, and higher healthcare costs. A 28-year-old who graduated with $45,000 in student debt and was paying $200 per month under the SAVE plan may now owe $350 or $400 per month under the replacement structure. That additional $150 to $200 per month is not absorbed by cutting discretionary spending, because there is no discretionary spending left to cut. It is absorbed by falling further behind on other obligations, by adding to credit card balances that are already at record levels, or by defaulting on the student loan itself, which triggers wage garnishment, tax refund seizure, and credit destruction that follows the borrower for years. And the student loan overhaul is being implemented during July and August, when every other financial pressure on borrowers is simultaneously intensifying. The grocery bill is rising from the drought and the war. The electric bill is spiking from the heat wave. The gas tank is costing more because of the Strait of Hormuz disruption. The rent or mortgage payment is consuming a larger share of income every month. And now the student loan payment, which for millions of borrowers had been the one manageable line item in their budget under the SAVE plan, is increasing by 50 to 100%. Brookings specifically noted that the Department of Education's capacity to manage this transition has been compromised by staff cuts. The loan servicers who process payments, handle disputes, and manage the transition between repayment plans are already overwhelmed by the volume of borrowers who need to be migrated from the old system to the new one. Hold times are measured in hours. Online systems are crashing under load, and the borrowers who cannot navigate the transition within the required timeline risk being placed in forbearance, which stops payments but continues accruing interest, or in default, which destroys their credit and triggers collection mechanisms. The student loan system in July and August 2026 will be a bureaucratic catastrophe affecting 43 million Americans at the exact moment when their financial reserves are at their lowest point since the pandemic. Wildfire season intersects with an insurance market that has already abandoned millions of American homeowners. The National Interagency Fire Center's seasonal outlook projected above normal significant fire potential from the Texas Hill Country to South Florida by July and August, driven by heat waves, drier than normal weather, and lingering drought that has persisted across the southern tier of the country since late 25. The Southeast is in its worst drought since monitoring began, with fuels from Hurricane Helene still scattered across western North Carolina, northeast Georgia, and east Tennessee, creating a fire hazard that will persist until the drought breaks by at least 2 categories. Heavy dead fuels from Helene have been consuming entirely in recent fires, and fires are re-emerging a month or two after being controlled or contained because the organic soils beneath the surface are so dry that they continue to smolder underground and reignite when conditions are right. And the wildfire risk is landing on top of a homeowner's insurance market that has already collapsed in multiple states. Insurance premiums have risen 55% since the pandemic began. State Farm, Allstate, and other major carriers have withdrawn from California, Florida, and Louisiana. Homeowners in wildfire-prone and hurricane-prone areas are being pushed into state-run insurers of last resort that offer less coverage at higher prices. And the insurance cost increases are landing on homeowners whose property tax assessments have been adjusted upward based on the post-pandemic surge in home values, whose mortgage rates are locked in at levels that prevent them from moving, and whose home equity is being eroded by the rising total cost of ownership that now includes insurance premiums that have doubled or tripled in 2 years. A homeowner in the Texas Hill Country who purchased their home in 2020 for $350,000 with a 3% mortgage may now face an insurance premium of $4,000 to $6,000 per year, a property tax bill that has increased 30% based on reassessed value, and a utility bill that will spike 20 to 40% during a July and August heat wave. The monthly cost of owning that home has increased by $500 to $800 per month since purchase, not because of the mortgage, which is fixed, but because of every other cost that surrounds it. And if a wildfire approaches their county, the insurance company that has already raised their premium may cancel their policy entirely, leaving them uninsured in a home that is their largest financial asset. The 2024 hurricane season produced $124 billion in damage and over 252 deaths from Hurricane Helene alone. The billion-dollar weather disaster average for the most recent 5 years is 23 events per year, more than double the 1980 to 2024 average of 9 events. Every billion-dollar disaster further destabilizes the insurance market. Every insurance market destabilization raises costs for homeowners. And every cost increase on homeowners reduces the money available for food, healthcare, savings, and the basic expenses of staying alive in a country where the cost of staying alive already exceeds what most Americans earn. Brookings identified the Highway Trust Fund reauthorization as a 2026 deadline that Congress must address, and the trust fund's solvency is directly tied to fuel tax revenue that has been declining as vehicles become more efficient and as the Iran war's oil shock suppresses discretionary driving. If the trust fund is not reauthorized, federal highway and transit funding lapses, construction projects stop, and the 5.3 million construction workers who depend on federal infrastructure spending face potential layoffs during the exact months when the rest of the economy is being compressed by every other pressure I have described. The Roosevelt Institute's 2026 economic preview described the current moment as a period of moderate stagflation and warned that the administration continues to use tariffs to gain leverage in international disputes, most recently through threats of new tariffs on European countries. The deportation-driven labor shortage in the construction industry, coupled with tariffs on lumber, has pushed up the hard costs of building new housing. Financing costs for mortgages and construction have been pushed up because budget deficits are siphoning funds from private borrowers and because all U.S. loans are paying higher risk premiums. The sustainable pace of job creation has collapsed to the point where healthy job growth could fall to zero or even turn negative by 2027, according to analysis from Brookings researchers. Average monthly employment growth has been just 17,000 since April 2025, a level that historically would signal a labor market in crisis. And the February 2026 benchmark revision to the jobs data revealed that 2025 had 911,000 fewer jobs than originally reported, potentially turning job growth negative for the entire year. That revision means the job growth Americans were told about throughout 2025, the monthly reports cited on cable news to demonstrate economic strength, were overstating reality by nearly 1 million jobs. 1 million jobs reported as created were never actually created. Americans who made financial decisions in 2025 based on those reported numbers, who bought homes, took on debt, delayed selling investments, or assumed the economy was strong enough to support their plans, made those decisions based on data that was wrong by almost 1 million. And the corrected data arrives too late to help the people who needed it most. The mortgage was already signed. The car loan was already taken. The credit card balance was already accumulated. The economy that Americans will be living in during July and August is not the economy they are being shown on television. It is an economy where job creation has functionally stopped outside of healthcare, where wages are not keeping pace with prices, where savings have been depleted, where credit has been consumed, where the grid is strained, where the food supply chain is under weather stress, where the insurance market has abandoned millions of homeowners, where the debt ceiling is about to be hit, where tariffs may be reimposed, where the student loan system is being overhauled by a department with half its staff, and where 45 states are in drought during the 2 hottest months of the year. July and August 2026 are not normal summer months. They are the months where every unresolved pressure in the American economy lands on the American household at the same time. And the households that enter those months without preparation will exit them in a financial position they may not recover from for years. Share this video with every American you know who has a mortgage, a grocery budget, an electric bill, a student loan, a retirement account, or a home in a drought or wildfire zone. The information in this video is the preparation they have not been given. Subscribe and turn on notifications. No spin, no party line, just the truth about what July and August are going to do to this country. Take care of yourselves out there. I will see you in the next one. And when July arrives, remember this video. Remember that you were told. Remember that the data was public, the forecasts were published, the deadlines were known, and the only variable was whether you acted on the information or waited until the information acted on you.